Hey, Global Studies. So I just wanted to give you a quick review of the philosophers and introduce you to this concept of protest, which we are going to be covering in the end of the year, essentially. This is the last bit of work we're going to be doing, and then one more project to kind of round out the year. Okay. So the question we're really trying to focus on here is what happens when people disagree with their government? Okay, what do people do? How do people act? How do they react to certain situations? So we're going to look at that. But first, I want to give you guys a quick review of the philosophers, and I just want to say that you guys have done an amazing job with your projects so far, and keep up that good work. So the very first thing I want you to think about is, ask yourself, what did Hobbes, Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau all have in common? Okay, so just think about that for a moment. You're right, they're all philosophers, but beyond that, what is one thing that all of these philosophers would agree with each other about? And I'll let you think about that for a moment. Excellent. So if you said that the role of government is to protect people from anarchy or this idea of a state of nature, right, where you do not have a governing body controlling the people or providing some boundaries for people, then you're right. So the role of government is to protect people from the dangers of an anarchy. And all four of these philosophers that we studied, and many more that you have not studied yet, you'll study some next year, all agree that the role of government is to protect the people. Okay, how best to protect the people varies from philosopher to philosopher, but they all do agree that protection of the people is the role of the government. So each philosopher had their own opinion about the relationship between the people and the government. Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau would all agree that if the government isn't holding up its end of the bargain of the social contract, right, and protecting its people, then people have the right to demand a change. In a lot of cases, this takes the form of protest, sometimes to the point that they will overthrow a government. And this has happened in many parts of history. Today, we might see protest that pushes for different political changes and for people to vote a different way than they may have in the past. So it's just, sometimes protest will completely overthrow a government. Other times, it will seek to change the way people think in order to make a political change in a upcoming election or something like that. So one method of demanding that change is through protest. So we're going to cover that within this unit today. So the textbook definition, if you will, of protest is an action expressing disapproval of or objection to something. Somebody doesn't agree with something, somebody disapproves of something, or is an objection to something, that the action that shows that disapproval and that objection is what you would consider a protest. Okay. And this most often occurs when people feel like they're being mistreated, either by the government or another group of people. Other times is when people feel that their rights are being violated. Here in the United States, we have what's known as the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which grants equal citizenship and equal protection of our rights under the law. And when people feel like a law or a group is going against their 14th Amendment rights, oftentimes this leads to protest and can eventually reach the Supreme Court, where the courts will rule on the law, or so on and so forth. Though that gets into a lot more detail that you'll know more when you get to 11th grade. Here's some examples of protests that actually have happened just within the last couple of years, and actually just within the last couple of months and last couple of weeks, really. The first one being last year when we had our new dress code policy. Students purposely violating this new dress code policy as a protest because they thought that the new dress code policy was unfair. Okay, so that was one form of protest that students took. Another form of protest that we've seen more recently in the last couple of weeks and months is people purposely breaking social distancing protocols during this pandemic of COVID-19 to speak out against economic shutdowns. We've seen this in places like Orange County. There were some right here in places like Pacific Beach, downtown San Diego. You may have seen some of the images and video from that, and you can see an image on the screen top right of that same thing. Okay, and in just the last few days and last week or so, there have been people, marching or running against racism with the new hashtag, I run with Mod, in reference to the African American gentleman who was shot while out on a run. And so there's a lot of these different ways that people are expressing protest and wanting to seek that change. These are just some examples of how we have seen that recently. So, but what does protest really look like? It can take on so many different forms, you guys. In the 50s, 60s, 70s, even, still today, and even beyond before that, throughout history, music and art has been a form of protest. Marching in large numbers. We've seen many marches on the Capitol buildings of various states, marches on Washington, D.C., and on the White House, where people will gather and perform a march and showing, that we care about this so much that we are able to get huge numbers of people to come out and support this cause. Another form of protest is boycotting, stopping the purchase of something that they feel is not good. If a company does something shady or something wrong, oftentimes you'll see a push for people to boycott that company, meaning don't buy products from that company, and that will hurt them economically and hopefully convince them to change their ways and their attitudes and such. Okay, and this is one that you guys probably see a lot more today than ever before, which is the use of hashtags. You probably see these hashtags on social media. I already mentioned the I Run With Mod hashtag. And I want to just kind of explain a couple of these pictures. If you look on the far right, you have the two pictures in black and white. The gentleman marching at the top, African American gentleman. This was during the African American Civil Rights Movement. And next to them is the National Guard. And so they were protesting, the mistreatment of African Americans in American history during the African American Civil Rights Movement of the 50s and 60s. Just below that picture is a famous picture of Rosa Parks, who challenged segregation in public transportation, in which she, the law was that African Americans had to sit in the back of the bus, and she purposely sat in the front of the bus and would not go to the back, where she was then arrested. And this led to a very large boycott of public transportation within the South, which ultimately would lead to the desegregation of buses. And so just an effective use of protest in a peaceful way. The picture at the very bottom, in the middle, is a Banksy art piece. Many of you may be familiar with Banksy, and it is a representation of, what somebody might be throwing a grenade, but instead has been replaced with flowers to show, peace and love, and to spread that rather than destruction. And so all of these different ways of representing protests have all been shown to be fairly effective throughout history. Okay? So you might ask, okay, Mr. Elliott, so what's next? Well, just below this video on the discussion board, I would like you guys to follow this particular prompt. It just says, why do you listen to music? How does music make you feel? Does music serve a different role in your life depending on your mood, who you are with, or what you are doing? Does music ever cause you to think differently, or to feel a part of something larger, or want to rise up and take action? So in the discussion board, I want you to consider this quote by Pete Seeger. He was a champion of folk music. He died in 2014. But this is what he said. He said, "One of the purposes of music is to help you forget your troubles. Another, to help you learn from your troubles. Some do. And some, referring to music, will help you do something about your troubles." So, do you disagree with this quote and why? Okay. Um, and as you discuss, just one of the things I want to point out, this is your opinion. There's no right or wrong answer to this. This particular discussion board, I'm not asking you to respond to any other classmates. You can if you like. But ultimately, this is just some reflecting that I want you guys to do before you guys jump into the project or the assignments this week. Okay. And as always, please feel free to shoot me an email if you have questions or want more explanation, or drop into those office hours. Okay, guys? All right.